Okay. So we'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us again today. My name is Mecca Leggett. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager with the South Carolina Apex Accelerator. Just a brief overview, we advise and assist businesses in the government contracting space. That includes one-on-one guidance, bid matching, on-demand training, and much, much more. We are funded in part by the Department of Defense Office of Small Business Programs and the South Carolina Department of Commerce. Therefore, all of our services are free to South Carolina and North Carolina businesses. It is our goal to assist DoD to increase the government and defense industrial bases through services that we provide. So if you're not yet a client, please feel free to sign up for our services on our website at scaccelerated.org. During this webinar, our panelists will discuss CMMC with a focus on how the recent mandate affects your business, and will give you some business-related strategies to reduce risk and optimize costs to achieve and maintain compliance. We'll start with a quick introduction of our panelists. With us today, we have Ken Bible, former CISO of the Department of Homeland Security, Jody Storr, co-founder of SMPL-C, Abu Sanchez, Solution Architect at Rackspace Government Solutions, and Brandon Sessions, VP of Services at Great Analytics. At the end of the presentation, we'll open the floor for Q&A, so please feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation using the chat feature, and we'll be sure to read and respond to them at the end of the presentation. Again, I'd like to extend a welcome and a special thanks to our panel today. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jody to get us started.
All right. Well, thank you, Mecca. And again, thank you and the South Carolina Apex team for having us here today. It's a great honor. And as she introduced me, I'm Jody Storr. I'm a co-founder at SMPL-C, and we're headquartered here in the great state of South Carolina. And we're also privileged to serve the defense contractor community with an affordable CMMC tool that automates the documentation process required for CMMC. Some folks call us like the TurboTax of CMMC. And, we help with centralizing, streamlining, and maintaining your CMMC compliance program. Also, I'm very honored to be here with this esteemed panel of CMMC experts. I do want to call out that we, as a collective group, represent a holistic approach to achieving CMMC compliance. It's actually a lot of fragmented parts that need to come together to help you achieve this program. And here together, we're trying to show that you can achieve this in a holistic approach. If you think of CMMC in two different ways, there's documentation that's required to show and prove compliance, and then there's the implementation, which is the technical and physical controls that you need to put in place to achieve that compliance. This is the team before you that can help bring that to you in order for you to be compliant to the standards that are set within the mandate. And speaking of the mandate, I would like to pass it over to Ken Bible. He is a great resource because he is an authoritative former government figure within the cybersecurity community at the Department of Homeland Security. And I love his perspective and his guidance that he offers to especially the small business community in CMMC. So Ken, would you like to take it from there?
Yeah, thank you, Jody. So thank you, South Carolina Apex, for putting this together first and foremost, because I do think this is cybersecurity, and we talk a lot about compliance, but cybersecurity and having some sort of framework for developing up your cybersecurity program and maintaining that cybersecurity program is really the key here. This isn't a new cybersecurity requirement. It's a new requirement to show that you are actually doing the things that when you sign a contract with DoD, you're signing that you're going to do. These requirements around meeting the NIST 800, 171, 172 requirements have been in contracts for over a decade. So this is really something that evolved out of about 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, several incursions into subcontractors for large primes that ended up with sensitive technical information, not classified information, but controlled but unclassified information ending up outside of the US. And there was a realization that self-attestation, which is essentially what defense contractors are doing when they sign on the line about a contract, was not working. And the flow down from a prime contractor to the subcontractors wasn't achieving the goal of maintaining the security. So what you see is the generation of some new rules in the FAR and the DFARs that apply this new program, which only applies to DoD. And the reason we say, then why is there somebody from Homeland Security here? Well, I spent 30 some years, 35 years on the Department of Defense side. And I was certainly one of those back 8 years ago or so when CMMC was first getting its legs under them, pounding on the table saying, look, we've got to close these gaps in the security posture of our industry because we can't afford to continue to have either breaches or just the ability of someone to come in and take this sensitive technical information away from us. But it's really important, and this is why these two different rules are included on this slide at the bottom, 32 CFR and the 48 CFR rule. This is what's implementing these CMMC program for Department of Defense contracts. And right now it is about Department of Defense contracts. The CMMC doesn't apply to the rest of the federal government. But what I will tell you, and this is something that I was very adamant about within DHS, is that we are checking. And in fact, it's a broader check than just the federal agencies that are contracting for the material. What's been instructive to me and interesting to me has been Department of Justice getting very active in terms of its cyber criminal program to go after organizations that misstate their cybersecurity posture through the False Claims Act, which if you're not familiar with, it's worth taking a look at because it can result in 3 times the damages to the government being awarded as a result of being found guilty of falsifying your cybersecurity posture to the federal government. So CMMC kind of gets you away from that because it's documenting up front, and you have to have the appropriate certification from an accreditation board. That's what we're talking about today, the CMMC level 2, and an accreditation from an accreditation board that would be a good piece of evidence to have if there was ever a question about your compliance. But I think importantly, cybersecurity has become table stakes for working with the government. It's billions of dollars that are being spent to build systems to manage the data of American citizens and to build the systems for our defense, for our healthcare, for our education, and otherwise. And we can't afford to go have that intellectual property just slip away without any kind of control. So I think this is a broad theme in terms of ensuring that we're meeting these NIST cybersecurity requirements and being able to show your compliance with those standards. So I really encourage you to look at it not through the lens of I have to go check this box, but look at it as a mechanism for building a sound cybersecurity program so you can protect the work that you're doing, because that's going to become, I believe, a competitive advantage to be able to show that you actually have the competencies and the right organization and right processes and right controls in place to safeguard the government's information. So I really encourage you to think about it through that lens rather than necessarily check the box or some sort of compliance requirement. Think about it more as how will it give you a competitive advantage. You've got a great team today on the panel to talk about all these details. And so I'm going to kick it back over to the panel and hopefully we'll have some great questions before we finish. Thanks, Jody.
There we go. Couldn't get off mute there. But no, thank you. Thank you, Ken. Yeah, and one last little note too for small businesses, there is a bill, I guess you could say, that's sitting on the Hill that is a tax credit, and it applies towards your, I guess, C3 PAO fees, which is essentially the assessor or the auditor that comes in and gives you that stamp of approval that you are CMMC compliant. It's kind of the last leg of the race in CMMC. Well, not the last, but it's near the end, put it that way. The last, it never ends actually, CMMC. So I take that back. You have to always be compliant, to Ken's point. But in terms of this readiness, it's the last leg of the race. And you will be potentially eligible for a $50,000 tax credit if you're under 50 employees. So, a little bit of, I guess, a breath of like, okay, the government's looking at small business and how can they support through this, because it is a bit of, it's an arduous process and it's expensive. But as Ken said, this is part of protecting our country. The cybersecurity initiative is a non-kinetic war happening with our adversaries, and they are getting our top secret information through the industry. So we need to lock that down. And that is.
Well, Jody, could I jump in on that one? Because,
yeah.
I mean, so classified information is really not part of the CMMC. This is about controlled unclassified information.
Yep.
We talked a little bit in kind of sidebars about what is CUI. And so for those that may have a little bit of gray hair, if you'll remember, there used to be all kinds of agency unique designations, whether it was law enforcement sensitive or not releasable for foreign nationals or for official use only. There were just a plethora of acronyms around special handling requirements for information that was controlled but not classified, controlled unclassified information. And so CMMC is dealing with that information. So if you've ever dealt with, say, technical plans that were deemed for official use only, or if you dealt with the Navy nuclear propulsion program with the Navy nuclear information, then that was most likely marked as not releasable to foreign nationals or no foreign. So we're talking about that category of information. When you get into classified information, actual general classification, secret, top secret information, or confidential information at the lowest level, then you have other requirements that are in play as well. But just to clarify that, we're not talking about it. It doesn't matter whether it's classified information or not. And the great example I like to give is if I have the floor plans for a sensitive government building, then what can I go do to that building or against the people working in that building? And so that would be probably controlled unclassified information. The floor plan might not be a classified document, but I sure don't want it getting out there to a potential adversary and making it easier for them to do something nefarious.
That's right. Yeah. No, that's a great specification. So, because I know in our webinar last week, there was a lot of questions, around, and Brandon will dive into this on the appropriate slide, but there were a lot of questions about the different acronyms and the types of information that qualifies for these different levels. So we'll dive into that as well, but feel free to post questions as we go through, because we want to make sure we're addressing what you guys need so that you can get on board and get started on this journey. But we'll start off with just a real quick analogy. I like to kind of open this up for people that are new to CMMC, because we all have to pay our taxes and we all have to do our taxes, whether we're, for personal or for business. So the analogy I like to use is the tax industry, and there's these resources that are out there to help you, right? And to get you across the finish line. And what I mentioned earlier on the call here today, we have a holistic solution that represents these resources. And from a defense contractor perspective, you all on the line, you have access to CMMC expertise and consultants, and that's what Gray Analytics does. Brandon here, who is on the line, his team are consultants that are able to help you with more strategic support, like as you gear up for what you need to do to start planning for the remedial activities that you might need to do for CMMC, just like accountants would be as you're planning your business. There's also things like tax software that's out there that helps you centralize, maintain, manage your taxes That's what we do here at Simple C, and we help you automate this. And you'll see in a moment how much documentation is required for CMMC. You need a system of record to help manage all of that, and also automate it, making it easier for you to manage your program year over year. Also, there's providers, technical and physical solution providers that can help you address the various controls that need to be met within this mandate. And that's Abel Sanchez here on the line. He is with Rackspace, and they have a very unique enclave that helps you. You can do a nice crawl, walk, run approach into building your compliance program through through the Rackspace technology. And then finally, there's the we call it IRS is equivalent to sort of getting your certification. It's a little bit broad, but essentially what the acronym is, if you are level 2, you need to get a certification through what they call a C3PAO. It's essentially a third-party assessor that comes in and says, yes, you are approved, and they go through all the documentation. That's why the documentation is very important, and they check to make sure all the controls are in place, and they will stamp that. And incidentally, Brandon's company, Gray Analytics, is also a C3PAO. So they have very, very qualified, talented, and certified individuals on their team that can help on the advisory and also can help on the assessment or the certification side as well. So this is a good representation or an analogy of sort of the ecosystem of support that you have out there to help you get through this process. We'll get into cost and timeline a little further in, but these are the resources. Hold on here. Why am I stuck? Oh, there we go. And then a little bit about the process. Just at a very high level, if you think of the CMMC process, it is an area of discovery. You start off where you have to find certain information within your ecosystem and identify the gaps that you might have so that you can start putting together the remedial implementation to fix those both physical and technical controls. So the second part is the fix. And when you're creating those fixes, there are certain documentation that comes with that. And, down below in the boxes, the white boxes below is a representation of the documentation that you need to create as you prepare for the audit or the assessment, as they call it. Then the next part is the report. And when you're building this report, this is very important because this is proving that you're doing the things you need to do to be compliant. And these documents are really the Bible of what the third-party assessor is going to be looking at. And they look at a lot of things, but this is sort of a snapshot in time just to give you an idea of what you need to prepare for. And then I think the one thing that not a lot of folks are talking about or really quite understand is that CMMC is not just a moment in time. It's not like I got to prepare for the C3PAO and then after that I can kind of set it and forget it. That's not how it works. It is a proactive compliance. They want you to be ready at all times to prove that you are compliant with the CMMC protocols. And they want you to be always on. This isn't, a moment in time like SOC or ISO. This is something you need to build a program around. It is a bit of change management, right, within your organization. So having a system of record where you have all your documentation in one place, you're able to refresh it and automate it at any time. As Ken mentioned, the DoD, they do check. They do knock on doors, and there are things called false claims acts. You don't want to get hit with that. You have to have that documentation ready to present when they're knocking on the door, and you have to be able to prove it at any time. So maintaining and having the resources like here on the line that are helping you with that ongoing initiative is going to be important. I will call out too that, for level 2, it is a triennial certification process. However, you do need to affirm every year you need to say, yep, I am compliant, I'm still compliant, and that needs to be done through a process. So I would say maintaining at minimum quarterly check-ins on your program would be a very valuable process to think about as you plan for the future of your CMMC program within your organization. Anything else, guys, that
Hey,
you want?
Jody, there's a question over in the chat.
Oh,
At what
I know.
point does the assessor come in to assess your company? I thought that was really good to
Yeah.
bring that up in this slide, right? So
Sure.
maybe Brandon, I don't know.
Yeah,
if you
Brandon, you want to take that?
Yeah, that'd be great. So an assessor would come in to assess your company when you've got a perfect 110 score in the SPRS system. So at this point, you're proactively reaching out to certified third-party assessment organizations when you feel like you're ready for an assessment. So we ask that internally you've went and done all the checks to make sure that you've got everything in place and that you've actually filed your 110 score in the supplier performance risk scoring system.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, the SPRS score is, within the system, at SMPL-C, for example, we would show that progressing on a dial. And we would show how you're mapping towards that 110 as you fill in all of these documents, right? So the documentation guides the SPRS score, essentially. And then ultimately, after the C3PAO, once they say, yep, you're good, they certify you, they would submit that score into a system called EMAS, which is what the DoD manages. And that's how they track their suppliers to make sure there's compliance in place with their vendors that they're doing business with. But any other questions? Ken, I don't have access to the questions. Anything else? No?
No other
I
questions?
don't see anything else yet, but Brandon,
great.
I wanted to kind of follow it up myself just because it was a good question. And I brought it up in the level 1 seminar webinar about the fact that just like with a financial audit, if you are prepared and you've done your homework in terms of documentation, you can reduce the amount of effort that the C3PAO has to expend. And that particularly plays into that triennial cycle. If you're having to start from scratch, if you were doing a financial audit and you have to go pull all the paperwork out of the boxes in the closet to go give to your auditor, that's probably going to be an expensive audit. But if you've done your homework and you've organized it in some sort of a way that it's all coherent and laid out in a fashion that the C3PAO is expecting to see, and the controls are laid out, then over time you would expect that cost of maintaining that certification is going to drop because the auditor simply has to do less work to get there. And Brandon, I don't know how we haven't been in this process long enough, but I'm just making the analogy to financial audits because most organizations have some experience in that.
Sure, yeah, and we as assessors, we look at, did you utilize an outside firm to help you with prep, or did you do it internally? We ask those questions. And it's not us trying to do anything more than solution how many hours we think it's going to take us to do your actual assessment. We look at, do you have all of your documentation in place? So we actually send a scoping guide, which I'm getting a copy to the Apex team so they can get it out to any organization that wants it, or you can email me direct if you'd like. But we'll get a scoping guide to you, and then through that, you'll list total number of sites that you've got for your building. You'll list what is your network stack. So what licenses are you using? Are you using, is it on-premise? Or are you in the cloud? Do you have a hybrid environment? We ask about, do you use a outsourced third-party management company or an MSP to manage your devices? Do you have the proper documentation in place? And so we'll list the things that we're looking for from a documentational aspect of things. And what is your current SPRS score? So when you put all those things together, we're able to kind of go back to the back part of it and look at it and say, okay, yes, we can go do an assessment for your company for X. Sometimes when you answer those questions, we'll know if you're really ready for an assessment or not. And so our conversations inside of those phone calls kind of tend to change because we can't advise during those phone calls, but we can suggest that you might want to, look at some items and or, work with a firm to help you with advisory, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. And with that said, you might as well keep going there, Brad.
Yeah, I'll keep rolling. So
Yeah.
Jody created this really great slide, and it's a great decision tree. And we brought this up on the last phone call, but it's a great way for, firms, if you're trying to figure out, do I really need to pay attention to this or not? Am I level 1 or am I level 2? This really helps for a very great. Thank you, Sarita. This helps with making those choices as you go down. And as you look at the first example up top, do you have a DoD contract? Answer yes. And does it have a FARS clause, right? The 52-204-21 clause inside of it. If that answer is yes, then potentially you are just a level 1. However, if it does include the DFARS clause, 252-204-7012, then that would immediately put you into that level 2 bucket. And the whole thing of what is federal contract information or what is CUI, we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. Federal contract information is as simple as literally if you're turning in a proposal to the DoD, that's federal contract information. Contract documents, subcontracts, federal contract information. Diagrams that you've been working on, proposal responses, personal information charts or reports, all federal contract information. So it kind of loops it all inside of that. But when you get into CUI, it's the things like the technical information for the potential widget that you're going to make for the Department of Defense, right? And or a prime contractor that you might be supplying that widget for them to make the bigger thing, right? If you're putting together something that is a part of an assembly for a missile, potentially, right? Those are things that go along with that. And I know in the state of South Carolina, we actually do have companies that work on missile assemblies here in the state. And so that they have these widgets that they do and they're great at what they do, but then they provide that back to a prime for them to finish out the overall piece. I believe their prime is Lockheed. So when you put all those things together, that's what that is. Then, number 2 is it goes, so you get away from contract, you go to data handling. Do you use commercial off-the-shelf software? Yes. Do you process, store, create non-public data? And if it goes no, then you go back into the questions of if yes, on the processing, storing, or creating non-public data, do you process, store, create non-public data continually? Is the answer yes, then you're going into level 2. If it's no for the do you process, store, create non-public data, then you're going back to level 1. Again, those questions kind of come into the identifying if you're dealing with CUI or not, commercial off-the-shelf software is something that we get questions about all the time, and be glad to answer any questions that you guys might have surrounding that. But for the most part, you're looking for how you can properly license and do the things that you need to from your systems, like your operating systems, or using Microsoft GCC or GCC High, and we kind of go through all those things in steps when we're asking for advisory questions. You want to go to the next slide? So one great thing about SMPL-C is that they've got together for both level 1 and level 2 these checklists that are inside of the system that you can follow. They really make it very simple and easy for you to go down the checklist. So if you're looking at a level 1, you're looking at identifying your federal contract information and the scope surrounding that, right? So you got to understand the requirements with that and then conduct your gap assessment. SMPL-C's product will actually help you with doing that gap assessment. We step in as subject matter experts. So if you have a question surrounding something inside of this that you're not really understanding, we can help you with kind of guiding you through that. Once you answer that gap, it then goes into fixing whatever gaps that were found so that you can collect evidence to then get towards the met category instead of the not met category for meeting those controls. And then you got your SPRS score that you'll put into the PIEE system. And you just continue forward with your self-assessment and you maintain your compliance. However, if you're level 2, Jody, you'll go to the next slide. You've got the bigger piece to worry about, right? And the focus on. So you've got all 110 controls, the 14 domains, 320 objectives inside of CMMC level 2 to focus on inside of that. So their tool is really great in identifying, the CUI and scope, working with the requirements. You're going to do the same gap. However, it's going to be expanded versus the level 1 because you're going to focus on the additional controls that you need to focus on for level 2. Their tool also helps you with collecting and looking at the gaps and collecting the evidence surrounding that. And then it also help you get ready for certification. So it'll pull everything together and have it nicely put together so that when I send you a scoping guide, you can easily go, here's what we've got, and here's while we're ready for assessment. We have everything kind of lined out and ready to go for an assessment. And then you actually go forth and conduct the C3PAO assessment with our firm or a firm of your choosing.
Yeah, and are there any questions? I don't have access because I'm driving
No
here.
questions over there right
I'm
now.
just making sure, because these are,
Yeah.
and these checklists will be available on the South Carolina Apex resource sites. And, obviously you can reach out to us too. We're happy to get it to you. And I do think this is just a recent update, Brandon, if you want to touch on this. This is a lot of text on one slide, but
Yeah,
think
no, it is. And I think Ken and I both tag teamed this one the last time, right? And so I'm gonna start, and then Ken, if you want to add in, please do. But inside of this, there were some notifications going around about what matters for CMMC level 2 self-assessment versus level 2 certifications. For the self-assessment for level 2, if you're dealing with financial data, this is the easiest way to think about this. If you're dealing with financial data or things like that, right? Your level 2 self-assessment. If you're dealing with controlled technical information, right? So the widget, the piece that makes the parts and does those things, you need to be level 2 certified. Those are that is the highest level I can get inside of this to actually add in what they're trying to do there. And again, this is an effort by the DoD to make it easier for companies to understand, in their efforts of trying to make it easier for companies to understand what they need to do to be certified. Because at one point we had, many firms that were dealing with just financial data, and they were worried that that financial data would actually pull them into a level 2 certification, and they needed to plan accordingly and then make sure their systems were, were fully compliant, et cetera. But the government has deemed that information not as highly unclassified data that they need to, so that they can protect that versus the actual technical information on how to create that widget that we were talking about earlier. Ken, do you want to add in more on that?
No, I think you kind of hit the highlights there. But I mean, certainly the references there around the National Archives CUI registry, right? That's always the authoritative source. And again, this goes back to an executive order back in the Obama administration that created the CUI program as an umbrella, right? And it's tasked the National Archives, NARA, with creating this registry so that people would understand what was actually considered to be part of this corpus of controlled but unclassified information, what was not. So you can always go to that registry. I mean, it's not the easiest thing to navigate, but the information's there if you're contemplating a contract and want to kind of understand where you think you'll play out. But otherwise, the other piece is what was talked about earlier is if those clauses are in the contract, then that's where you're going to land.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think, you're going to get a lot of information, about what you need to do for your contract, but probably one of the best ways to get information, if you can get it, because it's still a work in progress, the acquisition role is still pending, but is to go talk to your contracting officer, right? Or your prime. Like, if you can get information from them, like, what do I need to be? They can probably guide you in the best direction because of, they understand what's going to be going into the contract, and they understand what potentially is already a part of their contract if they're your
Well,
primes.
That's a great point, Jody, because the flow down makes them responsible.
That's right. That's right. And it's a part of a flow down. This is a whole ecosystem. You inherit each other's, clauses, so to speak. So you want to make sure that you just talk to your brethren and understand what's going on, and then use some of these things as guides to kind of prepare your team on what you need to do. Yeah, and we spent a lot on kind of the prep work and documentation and the assessment therein. I would like to maybe make a quick pivot, because this is a very important aspect, is actually remediating and implementing those controls to fix, the gaps that you identified as you went through these exercises. So I'll pass it over to Abel to talk a little bit about the Rackspace solution, which is an enclave. And it's a really eloquent way to approach remedial activities around your CMMC program.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar. Thank you, Apex and SMPL-C, for making this happen. I think this is really very important. There's a lot of information. The process is a bit complex, but it can be, with partners, it can be simplified. So I'm glad we're doing this. So we are basically the Rackspace. We are the fixed portion of this journey. We bring solutions to our customers that align with CMMC requirements. And our approach is really not to prescribe a solution to you that you have to then fit into. Our approach is really to be flexible as much as possible and provide different types of solutions or offerings that will meet you where you're at in your CMMC journey. Not so much a lane that you have to then change into. What we have here are 4 different offerings, and the way they work is they really start out as a simple, or not simple, but very strong foundation network, and then they work up in complexity and in support and services. So on the left, we have what we call a Launchpad. What that is, it's really an enclave in the AWS GovCloud. The idea behind that is that for those organizations that are not going to do a company-wide compliance, right, and that everything's going to change to include the accounting department and the janitorial services, et cetera. They just want to safeguard CUI, which is perhaps in 1 contract, maybe 2 contracts at most. So it's much simpler to move that data into an enclave. So from our standpoint, we're providing enclaves for that type of service. Hybrid is also possible. If you have some on-prem, some in the enclave in the cloud, that will also work. So Launchpad is really the foundation to that, the beginnings of that. It's really a strong network, strong perimeter, firewalls, security groups, a lot of logging, monitoring, all these things that are required per the CMMC program for 171. Right. So all of that's already baked in. As soon as you enter the enclave, all this is already happening. So that shortens your journey in the sense that you're not having to retrofit an existing solution, right? And possibly may not even be able to be modified to meet the compliance. You go into this enclave, and a lot of these services are already enabled and working. So Launchpad provides that foundational security secure enclave. If you need more than just that, say you don't really have the personnel, or they're just they're too busy really to dedicate to this, to the achieving this 171, then we can go into Ignition, which is, again, it's the foundation, and then now we bring in our people and start providing more support with respect to the audit role, or not the compliance role, right? And in that regard, SMPL-C, we partner with them to deliver the documentation management process as well. So now not only are we collecting the logs, but now SMPL-C is helping us in the enclave to actually manage the evidence, manage the journey, manage the process, the compliance stages. All of that is with Ignition. So that's if you want more, we can provide you more. And then if you really need a kind of a more of a support, really kind of not so much outsourcing, because you can't outsource compliance, or it's still your responsibility, but we can then bring more resources to help you in that journey. And then you can go into liftoff, which is then we can then provide the compliance personnel and engineering personnel to help with the managed services, provide updates, patches, all those things that are part of that compliance journey. So that's liftoff. And any of these can be, all it really depends on what your requirements are with respect to level 1, level 2. You could go Launchpad, stay in level 1 if you all have is FCI data. It's just straightforward. Enclave should be relatively straightforward as far as securing and meeting your FCI needs. For level 2, then you're going to need a lot more. So that's where we go to ignition or a liftoff. And finally, to the right, very right, we have our FedRAMP moderate paths. If you're really needing to get close to a turnkey solution, again, we are not going to give you a 100% compliant solution, because that's on the company's responsibility, not ours. But we can give you a platform, and the FedRAMP moderate paths is a FedRAMP moderate platform, in that we're meeting the FedRAMP moderate compliance requirements with respect to 800-53, which is many more controls, many more objectives that we meet for our FedRAMP customers. However, we've put together a product or an offering where we are able to help our CMMC customers come into this space, actually operate in our FedRAMP environment, get the benefits of FedRAMP, monitoring, Kanban, continuous monitoring, the logging, the SSP, the documentation with respect to FedRAMP, that then goes a long ways towards meeting your CMMC requirements. And in that space, in this enclave, the FedRAMP moderate enclave, it's really a vault. You're coming in and we're doing the vast majority of the work for the customer. We're patching, we're updating, we're logging, we're documenting, we're providing that information to the customer for their compliance needs. And it's the nth degree of security, I would say. So as you see in our offerings, we're very flexible, and purposely so, because the defense industrial base is very different. It varies, and they're small, they're large, they're mobile, they're data analysis. It depends what their nature of the business is, and so we know that we can't have a one size fits all. And so we purposely have done this, and we're trying to meet the customer where they're at on their journey, and not so much dictate what they need to do. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
No, I love that. I love that Rackspace has a very flexible architecture, and you can still leverage all the goodness that they've built, through the years. Rackspace has been around for, gosh, how long now? 50 years at least.
Yeah, for 20 some years right now.
Yeah.
And I would say this, that one of the early on, when we started down this path for our enclave secure offerings,
Yeah.
we noted that our document manage was a critical need for us, right? And this is where we found SMPL-C and found that they had a solution, because a lot of the compliance work is basically tracking the evidence and demonstrating that you're meeting the compliance. And while we can provide you an enclave, really tracking that evidence and managing it effectively is critical to this journey. And so that's why we included from ignition enclaves on, we include them in our offerings, and recommend that they do this early on, right? To
Right.
really help their journey.
Yeah, that we do automate that, within the Rackspace solution, where, you can have this always on compliance program, through the better together kind of scenario that we're presenting here today. So this is, a crawl, walk, run approach, for all the way, if you're a level 1, if you need to go to level 2, even into level 3 with the FedRAMP. So there's really a great option here across all of the CMMC levels. And we'll get into this, at a very high level. This is a brief breakdown on the amount of hours and the costs that are involved. And some of these costs, this is, take it with a grain of salt. Some of these are published through the Department of Defense, as they were looking at what this would cost a small business to become, and this particular visual is for level 1. And it is also under the assumption, now the DoD, when they put these numbers, some of the numbers together here, they were under the assumption that all of the companies are already NIST compliant, right? So they are making the assumption you are there because you are holding a contract and you have checked a box when you took on that contract to say that you are compliant. So they are making that assumption. So these numbers are actually probably lighter than they should be, but I think it gives a good compass and it's some data that we can work with. But if you are level 1 and you are doing all of this, like, I guess the old-fashioned way, very manually creating documents out of spreadsheets, OneDrive files, and just have things all over the place. And then you're also maybe remediating here and there and just throwing some tech stacks together and that kind of stuff. It's gonna take you some time. It's gonna take you some energy, and the overall amount of hours could be about 100 hours that you'd have to commit to try to get that across the finish line. Now that's assuming you're already kind of there. So maybe double that, really. But if you automate, I think what we're also trying to show, where you have these enclave solutions or you have, document automation, you can reduce those hours, considerably. And that's sort of what we're trying to show here, just from a general swath based on some data that we collected. And then with the level 2, you can see the hours go up considerably, because you are including the C3PAO hours in here too, and the cost associated with that. So you want to, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't really go through so this is about 17 to about 25,000, maybe guesstimate about 50,000 for level 1 that you might have to, and that's at the high end, that you may need to think about from documentation and remediation. And then with level 2, I would definitely factor in 6 figures as a small business, because the C3PAO alone is a pretty expensive endeavor. It can range anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000. It's kind of the Wild West out there, because there's only 54 C3PAOs in the ecosystem, so there is a demand and supply issue there. But it will range anywhere from about 100 to, let's just say, 200,000 for remedial and documentation support for level 2. And also from a timeline perspective, and I'll just go right to the yellow bar because I think it's relevant, that you should really think through about a 6 to 18 month timeline. 6 months for level 1, 18 months is the long road for level 2, could even be more depending on your complexity. But this is something that if you have not already got, if you're not already started on this journey, I would highly encourage you to. The CMMC clause will be hitting contracts this year. It's forecasted around April, May timeframe. So if it's in your contract, you need to be compliant to win that contract. So you want to get started now. You want to start understanding your gaps and, follow the process, find, fix, report, and maintain. You have an industry of resources that are here on the phone. You have consultants. They're also called like RPOs. You have compliance software that can help you maintain and manage everything. You have remedial solution providers like Rackspace, and you have C3PAOs, especially if you're level 2. So,
Jody?
Yeah, sure.
Just a comment to this, if responding to an RFP, right, as part of the, it's also prior to getting the award, you have to be compliant.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
It's not or starting the journey once you get the award. The expectation is that you already are compliant by the time you get the award.
Very, very good point. Yep. And yeah, guys, you have to have your compliance in place in order to receive this award. And you have to also be ahead of it. You know, if you're getting, you may not even be considered for the RFP. Everything's still a work in progress right now, but they're even saying if you're not in the system, they're not going to submit the proposal out to you, right? So,
Jody, if I could jump in on that one, because
Mhm.
I do believe that, I do think you're right there, that this is going to be, a factor in terms of how DoD views the available sources. And I would even say that, from my experience at DHS, in the civilian space, civilian agencies are looking at how they can assess the cybersecurity maturity of their industry partners. And I brought this up a couple of times, not to be autobiographical, but just to note that when I was at DHS, we looked at the requirements of CMMC and the third-party assessment, and we saw, because of the priority of DHS at that time around having small business primes, that it was deleterious. It was a disadvantage to small businesses if we adopted the full package of CMMC. But what we did initiate, and we did it through a evaluation criteria, not through a separate FAR requirement, but we actually implemented a cyber hygiene scoring mechanism that we could go change the weighting on how much we wanted the contracting officer to enforce the cyber hygiene, which is essentially the same NIST cybersecurity controls upon that award. So my point in saying that is that while CMMC may not trickle into the rest of the federal government, the rest of the federal government is looking at how do they measure the compliance with the NIST cybersecurity standards, and how do we start to go from a civilian agency. I think there was more of a desire to go, at least under the Secretary Mayorkas, a desire to actually encourage industry to get better at cybersecurity. So it wasn't a filter saying you won't even get an award. It was more around how do we understand where you're at and make sure that meets the minimum standards or the minimum number of the standards that apply, but get you more mature over time and hold you accountable for getting more mature. And to the point we talked at the very beginning about this tax break, my hope would be that there's some accountability for that money too, that if there is a tax break applied, that there would be some accountability. If you actually didn't achieve some level of compliance after getting this tax break, there legitimately ought to be some consequence to that. So this isn't just isolated to DoD. There's an interest in this across the board. It's just this particular program is for DoD, but it's very relevant in terms of your preparations for other agencies, other federal agencies as well. Over.
Yep. The CUI rule, they call it the CUI rule. Yeah, it's in effect for outside of DoD, but yeah, it's basically it's CMMC without the CMMC acronym. And the audit. Yeah. But
Jody, you had a question about what system, and they asked whether it's sam.gov, and I think that's what you're referring to.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you there, Ken. What was that?
I was just looking at the chat, and there was a question, what system, Jody? And the question mark, sam.gov, question mark.
Sam, what system are you talking about? The SPRS system, that's different than sam.gov. SPRS is basically where you would submit your score into. If you're level 1, you would submit a met or not met type of attestation. But if you are level 2, you would not submit it if you get a third-party assessment. The third-party assessor would submit that for you into a system called EMAS. Does that answer your question? The SPUR score is for
Well-
attestation.
We'll see whether they, yeah, okay, I think she's acknowledging, yes. thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, sam.gov is where you, I guess, sign up, right, as a contractor, and you can also look at various information there, but that's not really tied to CMMC directly. CMMC is the SPURS portal, and it's ties into the PIEE system, where you submit your met, not met, or any type of self-attestations. And then, like I said, the C3PAO is a system called EMAS, and they'll submit that for you. But good question, thank you. Anything else?
No, not at this time.
Okay, well, great. Well, if you guys have any questions as you go on this journey, you know, Apex is there for you. We're here for you. Feel free to reach out. We're happy to, you know, get you some of these resources. We have more coming that we're building so that we can support the Apex community. And, you know, we appreciate, Mecca, all your help and getting this out. And we look forward to doing more in the future.
Absolutely. I want to again extend a welcome, a thank you to the panel for joining us today. And I did see Brandon had to jump, and I don't see any other questions. But again, this webinar is recorded and it'll be available upon request if needed. And Jody has listed her information if you have any questions for her. And yeah, if there's not anything else, I will wish you all a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good
Thanks.
day.
Bye.
Bye.
Mm.